to the Grognards of Gaming, and I am with you as always, Rob the Grognard Dog, and with me are my partners in crime,
Miracle Mike,
and
JB.
All right, so Mike, in the episode before we had the good Father Aaron on as our guest, you had suggested that we do an episode on ambiance and props, and I would actually like to add a third subtopic into our title and into our discussion tonight. So ambiance, tone, and props. I've been wanting to talk about tone for a good long time, and you and I were discussing when might be a good episode to slip it in as sort of a subtopic. I think this is the one. So why don't we start, as we almost always do, with defining for our audience what we mean by these terms that we're using. So, Mike, why don't we start with you defining what you mean when you say ambiance, and then we could open up to Jonathan and me to say whether we think that's what we're talking about when we say it, and then we'll popcorn to me. I'll do my best to define tone, and then you guys say whether you think I've got it right or what. And then JB, you tell us what we mean by props. All right, so let's start with ambiance. So Mike, when you suggested the topic of ambiance and props, what did you mean by ambiance?
So ambiance is, part of it is location, could be location. But primarily what I was thinking of is lighting, sound, things of that nature that go along with, playing the game. When I think ambiance in the extreme, I don't know if either of you have seen these, but they have things like D&D in a castle. That is like the ultimate ambiance, that you can go on a weekend to a real castle and play D&D for the whole weekend.
Wow!
But it's a location, it's a sound, it's a feeling, which is tone is part of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking of things like sound, music, background, those sorts of things when you talk about ambiance.
That actually makes me think of something from a lot of conventions that I've played, and there's usually a thing called Cthulhu by Candlelight, which they might actually use candlelight. They may use like a kind of simulation of candlelight, but usually played at midnight, which I think goes with ambiance too, the timing of it. But the idea that they're really trying to bring forth the kind of gloominess or creepiness of the storyline.
Yeah,
that happens.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I think so. I think you guys got it right. I might pose the question: is ambiance the same as mood, or is mood a part of ambiance, or ambiance a part of mood? I mean,
so I think ambiance drives mood,
mm-hmm.
and going with what JB said, and Rob, you will remember this, and I'm sorry, JB, this is more of an insight. One of our earliest attempts at this was Ravenloft by Candlelight.
Yes.
When we were
very okay, young. We'll get there. We're just doing definitions. Yeah. We'll get to the storytelling, but yes, okay. All right. So I think we've got ambiance down. So then tone is the other subtopic we're going to talk about tonight. And so when I talk about tone, tone of course is a literary device. And I'm using it in that sense when I talk about game mastering, because game mastering is just oral storytelling. So I think that tone is the attitude or feeling that is conveyed by the storyteller, and it can be done through the tone of voice. It could be done through word choice. It could be done in a more literary sense through like sentence structure and formatting, that kind of stuff. Which might not be quite as relevant for oral storytelling, but I see it as different from mood. I see it as that attitude or feeling that the storyteller or the author is conveying, and tone is different. While tone is an attitude that the author is trying to convey, it's different from the listener's attitude, the player's attitude, the reader's attitude, and it's also different from the character's attitudes. So this is strictly a meta device, and it can be conveyed through props. It can be conveyed through setting, the physical setting where like as you said, the D&D castle sort of thing. that's what I mean by tone, and there are many ways to convey tone. It's the I like to think of it as, and maybe I'm now diverging out of definition, so I won't go into this too much, and I'll circle back to this. But I like to think of tone as like a dial, and you can dial something all the way over to like lighthearted, and then you could dial something all the way to the other end to like really, really dark and gritty and macabre. And anything in between, and anything up and down, or left or right. So, forward and back. So there's all kinds of tone. So,
3D.
3D. All right. So what do you think? Do I have that right?
From Sesame Street. Sorry. But,
okay. So yeah, go ahead.
And yes, I mean, I agree with that for tone. And again, you brought up with ambiance. And I'm wondering if it's all going to tie together to this, but tone leads to mood as well.
Yeah, it does. Yep.
So you got two, ambiance and tone, that can lead to mood. So yeah, but I think that's a good definition of tone, and it makes me. I've got questions, but we'll get there.
We'll get to there. Okay, so Jonathan, what do we mean by props?
Well, props can mean a lot of things. Props can be just about anything. Actually, I guess it really depends on how you're playing the game, but I think props in this case, we're talking about tabletop live role playing, and it can be anything that you bring to the table that helps you. It helps, I think, as our friend Peter used to say, visualize the what's going on, and helps the players visualize. Now, I'm not usually very big on props. Like, I mean, one of the few that I use that are like real props are like this. When I do a Star Trek game,
right,
I have that normally the battery's not on with it, but normally it has a sound effect too.
Keep talking. I'm just going to step out of camera, but I'm here.
Okay. I don't usually use props other than that. I think sometimes a prop could be a miniature, and miniatures can take a lot of forms. And one of the ways that I've done miniatures. Yeah. Oh, wow. What are we doing here? Oh, very cool. Very cool. Okay, cool.
Hey, this was actually a prop that a game master friend of mine gave us when we played a Star Trek game. He actually made these for all of us. So
very cool. Yeah. Right? Did he actually get the? That's actually a stitched on.
He went to the dollar store. See, now we're delving into stories. This should wait, but very briefly, he went to the dollar store. He was going to run a Star Trek game, and I was playing. We were. Anyway, he went to the dollar store and got colored T-shirts for all of the different colors on thing, and he ordered these patches and he sewed them on and he gave them out to us, and we wore them as we played our characters.
Very cool. Well, I'd say another kind of prop in miniatures, maybe as a prop. Normally, lately, I've been using much more simple miniatures like this, which is actually from a Planet of the Apes game that I ran at a convention just recently with a little simple plastic base. But of course, people can get very involved with miniatures to the point where they're painting them at the table, which I tend to
right, yeah.
Into the game, please. But now another kind of prop, which you pointed out, and I'm much more familiar with, is maps, which I tend to make a lot of. This right here, which is a world that we ran in, which was the pre-pulp game, 1930s pulp game world, which was supposed to be a 1930s feel to it. So I tried to make it a little bit more like a Europe and the United States, and maybe like a South America and
right.
Australia.
All right, we're getting off. We're delving into the weeds. We'll get there. We'll get there. We're going to talk about all this stuff. But I think so maps, devices, shirts, gun,
right.
Yeah,
so maps,
the toy
guns
guns
like that. That's what I would feel would be props. Anything that you can bring to the table, that allows the players to visualize what's going on a little bit better.
All right, so I think that is a good definition. I don't know that I have anything to add to that. Do you have anything to add to that, Mike?
No, that sounds about right.
All right,
I may have an interesting question later, but
yes, we'll all right. So those are the definitions of ambiance, tone, and props. So why don't we start with ambiance? That seems like an appropriate starting point. So Mike, since this topic was your suggestion, I'd like you to start the discussion about Ambiance. Go ahead.
Well, like I was saying before, the first time we dipped into Ambiance in our small group when we were teenagers, we got Ravenloft, which is the old version of Ravenloft, not the new one that's all over, but the original version of Ravenloft, which was a very dark vampire D&D story.
Yeah.
And we decided, we used to do overnights in Rob's basement. And we decided to do Ravenloft by candlelight. And and it added very much to the playing of the adventure, to be doing this in darkness. Now since then, a lot of the stuff that I think of from Ambiance is lighting, sound. Even though I do a lot of my playing online, there are people that will run music through the online mediums. We've played music at our games in the background low, just enough to hear. The Western game had a ton of good Western instrumentals running in the background from things like Bonanza and the Spaghetti Westerns and things of that nature. But background music and things of that nature from an Ambiance. And again, location. I have, there are games that I have played outside. LARPing is all about playing outside and about ambiance and where you are and finding locations. We talked about D&D in a castle. On my bucket list, would love to do it once. Pricey, a lot of time to invest. But, and a lot of them, I think there's only one that ever happens in the United States, and most of them happen over in England.
There aren't as many castles in the United States.
Yeah.
No. There's a couple spread out over. There's a couple up in Canada, Halifax specifically. There's a couple that I know of.
There's one in Central Park, if I'm not mistaken.
True. Now, if you could get Disney to let you do it in Cinderella's castle. There's an apartment up there, right? There's a suite up at the top of Cinderella Castle at Disney. But those are the kinds of things, and I think it just adds to the play. It immerses you. It gives you some immersion. But it's it can help. It can get people in the mood. It can help people focus. And really get into the adventure rather than as JB was talking about, painting miniatures at the table or these days playing on your phone while you're
a little guilty of that.
And things of that nature. But I think it's something that really adds to the experience. Something we learned early on before you could do this all digitally. But it's, I think it just adds to the experience and the immersion and the ability to add to the escapism aspect.
I want to cut into what you're saying because one thing about virtually playing, which is something that we've all been involved in since we're kind of spread out over, it's very easy with most virtual tabletops to add that in, to add music in, to add special effects in to the maps that you have. So it is very easy to evoke ambiance if you just spend 10-15 more minutes looking around how things work with them. That's a really handy thing to have at your fingertips.
It is, definitely.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that when we played that Ravenloft game, we played it at midnight, and we played it through the night, and that was great for creating ambiance. And and it wasn't just the externality of it being midnight or it being 1 a.m. or it being 2 a.m, but it was like the internalizing of it. It was we were starting to get tired. It was the witching hour, and we're still gaming. We're gaming, playing the story about a vampire, and it was really cool. Like it was there were the outside and the inside. You felt the ambiance. And
yes.
And Jonathan, you had mentioned Cthulhu, at the cons, but we used to do that in New York when Michelle would run Cthulhu for us. We would light candles. We would wait until midnight to start the game, especially if we were doing like a marathon weekend where, you know, we might play multiple games, and we would say, let's save Cthulhu for
Palooza.
Yeah, exactly. At the very least, we would start it after sundown. Yeah. But yeah, the later we could start it, the better. And that was a lot of fun. Of course, you know, I don't know that I could do that now at my age. I'd be too tired. But
well, if you're playing Cthulhu when you're supposed to end up crazy, sleep deprivation is a good way to get there.
That's for sure. That is for sure. Don't I know it? Yeah. So Ambiance is it can be fun. It can add production value to your story to put some effort into ambiance, lighting, sound, music. You know, I don't recall, Mike, if you were playing this Star Frontiers game with Paul and Steve and me, but I used in the middle of a session, the player characters had encountered a street gang. We were playing in sort of on a planet that was sort of a cyberpunk setting. And of course, this was the 80s, you know, and cyberpunk was kind of the rage. Mad Max and all that post-apocalyptic stuff was kind of that was the zeitgeist of the time. And I remember there was this scene where the player characters were in a dark cityscape, and suddenly headlights were, you know, a single headlight over here and a single headlight over there and a single headlight back here suddenly are going on, and they find themselves surrounded by these sort of cyberpunk dudes on motorcycles. And as I was envisioning this scene when I was crafting the session, all I could hear was Synchronicity 2 by the Police playing as these headlights came on. And I thought, I got to do that, like, at the table. So I had my little cassette stereo, and I popped the cassette player and I put, you know, the B-side of Synchronicity in, so that, and I pushed, and I queued it up so that, so then when that scene came on, I just pushed the button, and there's a good 45 seconds of ambient music before Sting really starts singing the lyrics. And it starts with I know, it's kind of like a weird sci-fi sound, and then Andy Summers kicks in with some heavy guitar, and Stuart Copeland's playing the drums, and then Sting starts singing this like, oh, and he's just doing that. And I had a good 45 seconds to narrate over this ambient music, the headlights going on, and the sound of the motorcycles, you know, revving up, and Steve just was blown away by that. I mean, like, he talks about that to this day. He says, boy, that really set the mood for that scene, and it terrified me. Like I really felt like we were surrounded and that we were in trouble. And you know, when Sting started singing, I just turned it off or lowered it. Maybe I just lowered it so that it was playing softly in the background. But that's the other thing you have to consider, is that if you are going to use music, it can be disruptive to the narrative, and it can, if it's too loud, the players can't think. And so having it, you know, turning it down when Sting started singing, so that it was just very low in the background, helped. But I just cranked it, you know, when it was the instrumental part, and it worked to great effect. There are also on YouTube lots of music and videos for pretty much anything. So if you are running a sword and sorcery game, and you get to a scene that's going to be like an all-out war between the orcs and the elves or something, you can actually go onto YouTube and just type in like fantasy war music or something, and you'll not only get a bunch of hits that are a bunch of hits on YouTube that is music, but it will also have a video, and you know, might be some kind of cool pattern or image. It could be a still image that you could just like maximize and just put on the computer, you know, the laptop behind you as you're narrating. Now again, that can be distracting, so you have to sort of screen it first to make sure that it's going to work with your scene. But there's lots of stuff like that can create ambiance.
And you just made me think of something that was given to me by a friend that works at one of these haunted attractions. There is a practice by some of them that they will run white noise at a certain hertz level because it puts you off balance.
Wow.
It's subsonic. It's not pervasive, so you're not hearing the white noise, but just the vibration at that, whatever that hertz level is, I'm going to have to look it up again. Whatever that hertz level is, will make you more susceptible to jump scares and being off balance and everything else at a haunted attraction.
How interesting.
What's the name of there's a pre-Roger Corman director who used to do stuff like that to get jump scares out of audiences, where he would do little like electrical effects.
Now, was that Ed Wood or was that?
No, it wasn't that. Rob, you're gonna have to look it up and put it on the bottom.
Yeah, we'll add it in post-production.
Yeah, but there that was common back in the 50s with B horror films where they would do stuff like that in audiences. Audiences.
That's very interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's Ambiance. It's definitely worth putting some effort into if you've got a game that calls for it. Not all games really call for putting a lot of effort into ambiance, but something like a Ravenloft campaign, a horror campaign, or like a gritty cyberpunk campaign. Yeah, it could work to great effect. So before we move on to tone, is there anything anybody else would like to add about ambiance?
Those are very good points, though.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Okay, so let's move on to tone. So tone. As I said, it's the way, it's the kind of the way you tell the story. It's the way you sort of evoke a mood or emotions from the players, and you can really match. You can turn the tone dial in any direction for any setting. Now, some settings lend themselves better to a certain notch on the tone dial, but you can still change that tone dial. And the one that I have in mind here, Mike, is the dystopian sci-fi game that I run for you when nobody else can make it to our game, and it's just you and me. And the first time that happened, I said, I'll just run something for you off the cuff. What you pick the setting.
There's a dystopian sci-fi game that you run?
Yeah, so Mike picked a dystopian sci-fi setting. And I run it with.
Talk about that off screen.
Okay, sure. And I run that with Fate, because Fate, it's easy to just sort of do a pickup session with Fate as a game system. So but the thing was, when we were brainstorming, I think we decided we wanted it to be like Blade Runner, the movie with Harrison Ford, Blade Runner, as opposed to the book Blade Runner. Although that is also a part of the setting, interestingly. But we wanted the setting to be like the Harrison Ford movie Blade Runner, and like a little bit of like Cowboy Bebop, the anime series with the bounty hunters. But I also wanted to add some kind of comical elements to it. So I also added into that mix Marvel Star Wars comics. So you take those three things, Blade Runner, Cowboy Bebop, and Marvel Star Wars comics.
Comedy in Cowboy Bebop, though.
And you mix it up. Yeah, you mix it up, and that's what we get. And because the tone of Marvel Star Wars comics from like the 1970s and early 80s was kind of was comic bookish, and the tone of Blade Runner is very dark, the mise-en-scène, the very dark. And Cowboy Bebop sort of vacillates between the two. It can be dark, but it's also often comical. We got we ended up with a dystopian setting that is a little bit lighter than most dystopian settings. Most dystopian settings are grim because it's set in a dystopia, and dystopias are by definition grim. But because I added these other elements into it, I turned the tone dial a little bit in the other direction towards lighthearted. And so I think that Cowboy Bebop's balance between grim and comical is where we're at in this story. So one day, Paul was able to join us. We were going to run the sci-fi game, and turned out Paul could join us that day. And I hadn't prepared a session for the game that we usually play with Paul. So I said to Paul, well, I didn't expect you to join in, but you're welcome to join in the sci-fi game. And we said it's a dystopian sci-fi. And Paul was turned off by the idea of dystopian sci-fi. He probably would have not pushed back had we just said sci-fi. But the fact that we threw dystopian in there, he was like, I'm not a big fan of like dystopian settings. And I said to him, no, don't worry, Paul, because I know what you're thinking. And you're thinking that the tone is too grim, but I actually run this story with a lighter tone. And he was like, a dystopian setting with a light tone? And I'm like, yeah, trust me. I did like that. Trust me. Yeah.
Trust me. That's why Stooges do dystopia.
So he did, to his credit, he trusted me. And he ended up really liking the game. That, it worked. It worked for him. You were going to say something, Mike.
I was going to tell Jonathan you'd appreciate it because our version of I have a bad feeling about this is I don't transport anything living.
Yeah. That's the tagline, right. Yeah. So, so tone is I think important. I think it's important to set the mood. I think that probably more so than putting production value into ambiance. Tone. You work tone into every storytelling that you do by your word choice, by the tone of your voice, by your facial expression when you're narrating. You convey tone, whether you're conscious of it or not. So I think it's actually a very important literary and storytelling device. How about you guys? What are your thoughts on tone?
Well, if I could go for a second, I think an important way of setting tone, and you're right, it's important to set tone, is really you can do it by just an opening scene and just getting everybody on the same page. I think I did it once. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I did it once. The game, I think we've already talked about it, which was it was the pulp game, two-fisted pulp game.
Yes.
But we decided we were going to do a big backflash to where it took place on the Titanic.
Yes.
And I wanted to get the idea, because I knew a lot of it was going to have to be sold on the idea that maybe people didn't remember, or a few of the characters that are involved that are present characters might not remember some of the things that happened or make a connection. So I started by telling a personal story that had nothing to do with the game. It had to do with, I think, my father having broken his back when I was a kid. And I remembered that it had happened, but I hadn't remembered that I'd seen it happen until I went back and visited the house that I'd grown up in that somebody else was living in at that point, and realized that the last time I saw him was washing windows on a ladder. And then I remembered that there were ambulances, an ambulance suddenly pulled up and taking him away, and I hadn't realized that I'd been looking at him just before he fell off the ladder and broke his back, and that affected the rest of his life. And then I said, it just goes to show that until certain points in your life, you can completely forget something really, really important until another moment in your life just brings it out. It just brings it back. Yeah. And then I went into the story. I didn't explain why I told that story at all, but I kind of made a serious, I kind of gave it more of a serious tone, but also the idea that I was setting the concept that you can forget something and then you don't realize it until it comes back. And it paid off at the end. I remember you actually maybe you picked up the ball, or maybe it was Michelle, of a button from a doll, like the eye from a doll that he had been saving, and realized that it was the doll of this child's doll that he had somehow gotten, and realized that the small child was actually Mikari.
Yes.
And hadn't made the connection at all. And it was just a great moment at the end. And I hadn't even thought you guys were going to do that, but it was a great moment that you picked up on it and did it. So the tone of the game was really set right at the opening. And you can do that in a much more direct way, too, by playing like a scene of the villains hatching their plot, or of a news broadcast or anything like that, or an opening, maybe, and make it sound like it's a if you're playing something horror related, make it sound like it's a letter, like from an epistolary, like Dracula or Frankenstein, which are letters and loft books and things like that. But you can set the tone just by the first scene, and sometimes it's the most important scene is the first scene, to get everybody on the same page.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I talked about this a couple of Grognard episodes back, and you liked it so much, Jonathan, that you said you wanted to steal it. But I had run for another gaming group, a D20 Modern, which was a Wizards of the Coast sort of modern storytelling system, using the D20 system. And I ran like 1970s cop story setting, and I called it D20 Mod. And we ran it like, in the style of those 70s cop shows. So I opened every session by playing the song Outa Space. It's an instrumental song by, I think it's Billy Preston. And it's a funky kind of song that you might have as an opening credits theme song in the 1970s. And I would just, I would as soon as it would play, I would say I called the campaign "They Fight Crime," and so as soon as the music would kick in, I'd go "They Fight Crime," starring, and of course everybody had picked an actor that they thought would be portraying their character. So I would say Ed Asner as Father Mike, and then so the guy who was playing Father Mike, he would take like 10 seconds to narrate a scene that had been clipped out of the series for the opening credits, and he would just for 10 seconds, and then right, okay, and then and starring so and so as such and such, and the guy playing such and such would do the same, and we'd go around the table like maybe twice by the time the song was over, and it was a lot of fun. It really set the mood right away. Using that music and that technique of having everybody jump into the narration. And sometimes that was the most fun part of the session. Like, I remember one of the players, his name was Scott, his wife would come down into the finished basement where we gamed just to watch us do that. And then after we finished the opening credits, she'd be like, "That was great, guys." And then she'd go back upstairs, and then we would play the game. So, that was a great example of, if I do say so myself, of setting the tone, as you said, Jonathan, at the outset. And then it just carries through. It infects the rest of the game. It's marvelous. All right. Anything else we want to say about tone before we move on to props?
So just one quick thought, similar to what you guys are talking about. Things that I've seen done, and one or two that I've done. One of my sometimes favorite, sometimes most hated thing that is done with television is starting with the scene that's after the session.
Oh, yeah. 5 days earlier. Yeah,
5 days earlier, that one. Or the bit of, this all happens off camera, but severely impacts what's going to happen in this session, and you don't know how until you're working through the session. But also, the other thing that I think of when you're talking about tone and you're talking about sentence structure and things like that, cadence. Cadence is wonderful. People will make fun of William Shatner for James T. Kirk, and they beat fade of James T. Kirk. But setting a cadence like that, or going up an octave, or down an octave, or putting gravel in your voice, things of that nature when you're setting up the background is great for tone.
Right on, right on. Well said. All right, let's move on to our final subtopic, and it's the moment we've all been waiting for, the show and tell portion of our program, props. So, so the one that I'm wearing, as I said, my friend Don, you guys both played with Don. He ran a Star Trek game, and he had actually a very clever idea. He wanted all of the players to play characters from the original series. And he didn't want to leave it up to us to just pick a character. He wanted to see who the players were best suited to play. So what he did was he took us two at a time, and he ran this filler session. It wasn't Star Trek, but it was a sci-fi thing where, you wake up in a unisuit, in a unitard, in this room. And there's a gun in the middle of there's a laser gun in the middle of the room, and it looks like it could be a cell or something. Go. And obviously the player who leaps for the gun, not really knowing what the circumstances are, that player is leaning more towards a physical character. I played the opposite of that, and ended up demonstrating that I was suitable to play the Doctor, Dr. Bones. So that's who I ended up playing, and so Don went to the dollar store and he bought these colored T-shirts, and he ordered these patches, and he sewed them on, and he gave me a blue one, and whoever was playing Captain Kirk, he gave him a gold one, and so on and so forth, and it was a lot of fun. I think it helped get us into our characters, and it's just fun. It's just fun to have a prop there. It's something to play with, Father Aaron, when he does the Dungeon Minister recaps of his Heroes of Honeywood D&D game that he runs for his children, he uses a lot of constructed set dressings. He'll build a little castle, he'll build a little well. They use their miniatures and stuff like that, and he even said in the session where we interviewed him on Grognards of Gaming. He said that really helps. That really helps focus, particularly younger players. It gives them something to focus on, and I think that's even true for older players. Although, as you demonstrated, Jonathan, it can go too far where you're like painting miniatures at the table or stuff like that, where the props can become distracting. So there is a line to draw. But let me. Just really quick, I want to show you one of the earliest props I ever created. So, TSR used to make modules. They still do. They make pre-created modules. And there's cover art, and it's a booklet, a soft cover booklet. And so they did this for not just Dungeons and Dragons, but they did it for Star Frontiers as well. And when we were playing Star Frontiers in the 80s, Mike and Paul and I, we were usually playing. We did play Warriors of White Light. We did play some of the TSR pre-created modules. But I liked to make up my own stuff. So what I did was I got a black folder and I decorated it, and I tried to make it as much like a TSR cover as I possibly could. And so this is a Sathar. They're the villainous species in Star Frontiers, and this is a very important NPC. She was a mentalist, and she was instrumental in driving the story. And then there's just some sort of abstract art, a red planet, and a man in the background holding his fist up, and a dying star, and so on and so forth. And I decorated with letters, and I used the TSR Star Frontiers. I drew the Star Frontiers logo as best I could. But I even went so far as to, on the back, mimic how they would put a second picture on the back, and I copied the text that they would often write at the disclaimer text or whatever, the copyright text, and it's just a folder, and on the inside, I had all of the materials. So I kept this. So this is like from 1984, 1985, and now I use it actually to hold drawings that I did for other games, and our audience is going to see these pictures as we do more episodes of the Empire Club. But these are drawings I did for the characters in our Empire Club game, and I specifically made these drawings for our website, where I would post summaries of each session. And I did that because Jonathan and I were round robin GMing, and it helped for me at least to keep track of the story that Jonathan and the previous round robin GM had created, and then the stories that he and I were creating together. It just helped to have these 3-paragraph summaries on a website that everybody could access. And I put these pictures on there.
And by the way, I seem to remember that people besides the people who were playing were accessing that website and reading it, going, "I want to find out what happens next."
Yeah, we actually had an audience. It was
the website became kind of a prop.
It did become sort of a prop. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go on for too long. I want to popcorn it over to you guys. But this is a character sketch that I drew in a superhero game. And the name of the character is the Video Avenger. And Jonathan, this setting was a superhero setting that was supposed to take place in the 1980s, although we were playing the game in like the early aughts, like the 2000s. But this character was supposed to be like the Silver Age version of your Golden Age superhero character. What was his name? The Radio Ranger. Radio Ranger. Yeah. So then so I figured video killed the radio star, so I made the Video Avenger. But the reason I'm not just showing you random pictures that I drew. The reason I picked this one in particular, because I have lots of character sketches. There's Alcaris, Mike. But I got a folder full of old pictures. But the reason why I picked this one up in particular was because the Video Avenger's shtick was he could turn from a solid person into electrical energy and go into ports and light bulb sockets, and he could travel along electrical lines to the other side of the city almost instantaneously and come out of a light fixture. Of course, it would break the light bulb, but he would come out. And yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Who came first, that or online?
Well, online was sort of he was the next iteration of the Video Avenger. Okay, so right. Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because actually the story is really about online. So the Video Avenger did all of that, and then the Video Avenger had another iteration called Online, where it was supposed to be like the year 2000. So the Video Avenger was like the 80s, and then the year 2000 was Online. And whenever my character would transform from a normal human into Online, he had a tagline. So like he would start to crackle with energy, and his superhero suit would start to form around him, and he would put his fists up in the air as they were crackling with energy, and he would yell, "I am online!" And then there would be one final burst where he would then turn fully into the character. And what I would do is I would take all of the papers that were on the table in front of me, including the picture of him and my character sheet, and I would throw them up into the air, and they would fly around like this, and everybody would be like, the papers would be raining down at everybody, and it was kind of like, the burst of energy made a kinetic burst and people got a kick out of that. Every time I did it, it made everybody around the table laugh. It was a lot of fun. It got everybody into the ambiance, got everybody into the mood of the game, which, for a superheroes game, it's supposed to be exciting and fun like that. So, anyway, those are some props. And last but not least, I did want to share this prop with you. This was, if you could see behind me, the Lord of the Rings glass goblets. They were like, I don't know, Burger King or something was giving these out, selling them when the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. And these goblets are awesome because there's a little switch on the bottom. You turn it on, and it lights up red. And I don't know if you could see it. It's really cool.
I see it a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of hard because it's bright in here, and I've got these green lights on either side. But in the dark, how about if I do this? Give me a second. Let me turn this light off. Yeah, it's a little better. You could sort of see that they light up.
The drink up that was in there then, right?
I beg your pardon?
It lit the drink up.
Yeah, right. It lights the drink up, and it's a really neat effect. So I run a Changeling game for my friends. I do the recaps also on the Fate Master Cesium channel, so folks are familiar with the Changeling game. And one of the ways that the enchanted Changeling character enchants the mortal NPCs is she lets them she makes Kool-Aid and she gives them she gives these children, they're children characters, she lets them drink Kool-Aid out of Burgermeister, which is supposed to be Burger King, Burgermeister goblets that they get with the Happy Meal, and so she fills it with Kool-Aid. And so I always we have dinner before we game, and I always set the table with these goblets, and it's just like a pre-game prop. So while we're eating dinner, we're already getting into the mood for the game.
Cool.
Yeah, and the very last prop I'm going to talk about, then I'm going to turn it over to you guys, is I started running, using the Fate system, I started running a Three Musketeers game, a Dumas set, Dumas, characters. And Mike eventually joined that game too. But I was running it for Paul, and when it was just Paul and me, the game started off with there was a love letter that was sent to his character, and so I actually hand wrote this letter, and I tried to use as frilly, kind of girly handwriting as I could to make this love letter, and then I sprayed it with my daughter's perfume and put it. But my daughter was like 10, so it was like cherry, like it wasn't even really. That's not perfume. It's like the cherry, whatever, Banaka, whatever. And I sprayed it with that, and I like sealed it up, and I poured some wax in the back, and I like made a seal on it, and that's how I started the Three Musketeers game. Like I handed that to Paul. I said, this courier comes and finds you wherever you are and hands you this, and it was a love letter from his love back in the village that he was from, and that leads him back home and gets him started on the campaign. And Paul really appreciated like that little prop.
He has the letter.
He still has the letter. As a matter of fact, he put the letter in his dice bag, and the cherry Banaka, it permeated the dice bag, and the damn dice bag smelled like cherry Banaka for like a year. It was hilarious. But so those are some props that I used to great effect, and I find that people appreciate it. It's just fun. I don't know how else to put it. It's just fun to have something tangible. What are your guys' experiences with props?
Well,
I'm going to grab something. I'm going to let JB go first. I'm going to grab
yeah. I like I said, most of my props have been, really the only time I've delved into props, I have one that I don't know what I did with it, but I have a communicator too, but I would use this during Star Trek games to kind of give the idea of, what was going on. This isn't as this is much more effective when you're actually using it in a live game, obviously. But I should say the props I used to use most often were maps, and you pointed this out too. Maps or pictures of what I was trying to convey. I'd already shown this, which was the map of a world that I put together. The game was the proto game of the
Empire Club.
The Empire Club, right? Yeah. I had done that. Now back in
and for our viewers, be sure to watch episode 0 of the Empire Club podcast, which is posted, I think, just before this episode. So go ahead back and watch that. I think you'll like it.
Back in the day, you used to be able to get these things, which were right, and so, but they were just for desks, for padding, and you could write on them and then rip it off, but they always had little like four squares to an inch, and they were handy. They were like little not hats, but squares. And you could use it for mapping really easily. So I'd buy a few of those, and then I'd make a map. Like, there's another one that I did for another game, and I'd use, I had this whole big thing of colored pencils, and would put together, this was a fantasy game that I think I ran twice, where it was all going to take place with people who could fly. Basically, all the characters were races that had somehow figured out how to fly naturally. But Michelle was playing like a gargoyle. She was playing a gargoyle, and then Jason was playing something else. And then I had a game that I was trying to evoke. This was it was supposed to be a Gamma World type setting, and I think Rob, you may have even played in this.
I did play in that, yes.
Yeah, and they were supposed to, and it was supposed to be the area right around New Jersey and Manhattan, and the characters went on a quest to find out. I called it Theta World as instead of Gamma World, and they were supposed to go on a quest to find a tower that had all sorts of technology in it, so that they could stop what was happening. There was some horrible fate that was going to befall their community unless they figured out something. So they were all taking this long trip. And then there was.
If I can no, go ahead. I'll interject.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, so that group that played that post-apocalyptic game, that was one of the last games we played with, like Edgar and Hardy and Manny, and that was before that group sort of broke up. And I remember that one of the complaints that one of those guys had, and I don't really remember which one it was, could have been Edgar, could have been Manny. I don't remember what it was, who it was exactly, but one of the complaints was, oh, like, I don't like that Jonathan always had, like, he draws these pictures and he holds them up and he says, this is what the guy is holding, or this is what the guy is wearing, and he's drawn this guy in a uniform, or he's drawn this ray gun, and the guy and the person who was making this complaint said something to the effect of like just narrate it, let me imagine what it looks like, and I hear that, but I actually had the opposite experience. I actually loved it when you held up these pictures, because you were excited about the pictures that you drew, and that excitement was palpable, and that excitement was infused into your storytelling, and it infused us, and I became excited because your excitement about what you had created, about the artwork that you had created, was infectious. And so I actually like that. The complaint was like, with Jonathan, it's like a show and tell. But I thought that was great. So I guess if there's a lesson to be learned, I guess you want to read your audience. Like, maybe there are players out there that don't appreciate it, but I can't. I just didn't find that to be a reasonable complaint.
Well, in any case, that was most of what I would. I had like smaller maps for the Star Trek. I had a map that I made up quickly so that somebody could figure out what the interior of this specific kind of shuttlecraft in Star Trek had, and I think I would do sometimes actual pictures of characters. I'm not sure I'd be able to show it very quickly, but here's one. Hold on, I've got this pile. This is organized about the same way that I used to organize stuff back. Which, if you'll remember, I was never organized about this stuff, but I'd have a map like that's a more direct map of the scene as it's taking place, so that I could have people, kind of, and I would reveal the map as I went along, and I'd have little pieces of paper over the parts that I didn't want them to see yet. So it was like pre computer graphics. So you had to kind of draw stuff. I mean, there was computer graphics, but you had to have a little to, have the programs to do that. And I don't think they came out nearly as nice as some of the stuff I was doing. So I just did it, and it took me. I had a lot of free time at the time. I think all of us did when we were younger,
yeah.
Where you could just spend hours doing these like intricate little things. But I always enjoyed doing that, and for me, half of the fun of the game was creating that stuff.
Right.
And creating pictures of some of the characters and or of the villains, and I think I cannot find it, but I had a complete map of Port Bastion. I had a really detailed map of Port Bastion, including all the cross streets and where everything was.
That was your superhero game set in the 1930s, right? A golden age.
Yeah,
game.
We have a 1930s superhero game. Actually, it was late 30s. Just before World War II, but World War II was already going on in Europe.
Right.
And we were, but yeah, I had this whole big fictitious city called Port Bastion, and I drew an entire big, like, detailed map of it. But I allowed people to give me ideas for what your part of the city was.
Right.
because everybody had a character that was from a different part of the city. So there was like little Kyoto was a Japanese part of the city.
Yeah.
You had
So I have a funny story about that. I
yeah,
played the Vamp, and the
yeah,
Vamp was this mousy librarian woman, but she was sort of a Batman type of character, like, but also kind of like the Hulk. Like when she saw somebody in distress, she would transform into the Vamp, and this vampiric superhero would emerge from her, and so she was Romanian, and she lived in a Romanian neighborhood. And this was sort of based off of the little Italies that were common in big cities, but this is like little Romania. And I remember saying, you had the map and everything, and I was like pointing to a section of the map, and I said, let's make this like section here, little Romania, and you were like, okay. And I remember you said something like, what separates little Romania from the rest of the city, though? Like, what physical barrier? And I was like, nothing. And you were like, well, you wanted it to be like an insular neighborhood, right? And I was like, yeah. And you were like, so what makes it insular? And I was like, well, it's just like just the fact that it's an ethnic neighborhood. Like people who aren't that ethnicity just don't venture into that neighborhood. And you were like, yeah, but isn't there like a physical boundary? And I was like, well, yeah, it's like a certain street. Like you just don't cross 110th Street, because if you cross 110th Street, you're in the Romanian neighborhood and you're not in your element. And I remember, because you were like from Jersey and I was from Philly, and you couldn't wrap your mind around. You were like, no, there has to be like a tunnel or some sort of aqueduct or something. And I was like, no, it's just like a street. Like people just know, because that's how it was in Philly. And for you, there were physical barriers. So I remember that was kind of comical that we had a little bit of difficulty in meeting of the minds there. We ended up compromising.
I remember that's why I put canals in that city. Because I wanted canals to cross either this way, and then you were like in this box of canals.
That was the compromise.
I realized that it was that not all supernatural creatures would cross in because it's running water.
Right. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
So that was funny. All right. So that's great.
That's fine.
How about you, Mike?
So, and I've used a lot of, going back in the old days, graph paper was the biggest prop that any of us ever had.
Yeah.
We built castles, we built ships, we built everything on graph paper. We didn't use a lot of miniatures or things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I have done, maps and things like that. And Rob, you've done great, like letters and things like that. It's not only Paul's letter, you've done other letters like that and different things of that we've gotten before. But it's also, so I've done maps where, when I want the characters to draw a map, which everybody used to draw a map back in the characters the DM had his map and he would describe it to you and you would draw your own. But I've also done it to the point of taking, making 2 copies of a map and burning one and handing over the burnt piece that's left, or the burnt piece of a letter or something like that, or making it look old. I've done those. The one that I use now, a more modern one, and I'll catch some flack for this, but here's what I would qualify this and say I would never use it commercially. You guys know I use AI tools to help us draw our characters, to draw heraldic symbols, to create weapons, to create certain scenes just for us privately, because it's a very good tool. Now, one that I want to use, which I've seen, which I would break the rule for people messing with something at the table while we're playing, they have these puzzle boxes that have all these different intricate symbols on them. And you can set it up in a certain way and put some clue in this box and hand it to your players. And when they can get the box open, they can get the clue. They're wonderful things. You have to look them up online. They're great. And I'm going to finish with one, Rob, that I got you with, that I probably think I shocked you with. So again, we've talked about playing one-on-one adventures. So one of the one-on-one adventures I've done for you is you playing a Jedi Padawan. And I came over to your place when I was still living close by, and I was running a Padawan game from you, and you ended up in a smuggler's den, and you needed to get information out of a smuggler. So in order to do that, I actually brought a Sabacc Star Trek or Star Wars game And the way that you got information out of the smuggler was whether you won hands of sabacc against him or not. And we actually sat and played at the table.
We did. It was like a game within a game.
The game. So, and I like things like that. Like, you know, if you want to think about it, if you're playing like, you know, a Vegas thing, and you can sit and play, you know, Hold'em or Baccarat if you know how to play Baccarat. And you can sit there and actually play the game. I like props like that. So that's the one.
I could sing songs by Burt Bacharach.
Yeah. I have also brought lightsabers to our Star Wars game before, which I have on a shelf here. So I brought lightsabers to the game and things of that nature, just for ambiance. Ambiance, haha, prop for ambiance. Now, one other thing that we haven't talked about is I've seen people go to game in costume. Well, you did the shirts, but I've seen people go to game in like and then con in like form. I've seen people go to con.
Well, that's more. Well, you mean an actual tabletop game in not LARPing, but actual.
Yeah,
okay, all right.
An actual tabletop game, like showing up at the table as their character. I've seen that done.
Yeah, that's common at cons. I've not really seen it done much in a private setting, but yeah, a lot of people do that at cons.
I've seen it done a few times on what's popular now. If they're presenting a new game, I think they did it with Dune. They've done it with Lord of the Rings, where they get some very semi-popular online actors who people know from other things, and they invite them to play a game. And they run it, and some of those actors will actually show up dressed as the character, which I found kind of interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, great. All great stuff. Ambiance, tone, and props. Lots of ways to just enhance the production value of your storytelling, of your RPG, your tabletop RPG. So, any final thoughts on ambiance, tone, and props before we discuss what we might do in our next episode?
I just think that the people should spend. I think go back to if you're on a virtual tabletop, it takes maybe 30 minutes to go over and look if you're a GM to see how music can be used, how special effects can be used to great effect with characters, and I think they will enjoy it. Also, sound effects too can very easily be put into a game like that, as long as you're familiar with the tabletop.
For sure. All right, great. Well, that was a fun episode. So, Mike, let's say it's your turn to pick the next topic. What do you think we should do the next time around for Grognards of Gaming?
So something we talk about often is how developmental RPGs have been for us in the past. Even now you're seeing articles come out about skills that RPGs teach people and things like that. So maybe a discussion of what we have learned by being role-playing gamers and, you know, what benefits and things we have gained from actually, you know, participating in this hobby.
That sounds great. Okay, so what have RPGs taught us, I guess, right?
Yes.
Excellent. That's a great topic. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Grognards of Gaming, and we will see you next time when the Grognards discuss what have RPGs taught us. How have we learned developmentally from RPGs? All right, see you then, and thanks for coming by.